2019, if you had asked me what's in my mental health toolbox, I would have laughed you out of the room. Quite honestly, I wouldn't have known what you were even talking about. This is the disclaimer where I remind you that I'm not a doctor, I'm just a guy telling my own story, and so anything I talk about in here is just my opinion and should not be used to diagnose anyone, yourself, your crazy uncle at the next family reunion, or whoever. We're rebuilding this bike and talking about mental health in a series called the Bankruptcy Bike Build. We've got wheels to take care of today, and I am replacing these zombie apocalypse proof WTB wheels with a set of Prime Aura carbon gravel wheels. I'm gonna pull the Shimano driver off of there and replace it with a SRAM XDR driver. I'm gonna put Prime center lock disc rotors on there. I'm gonna mount up some Specialized Pathfinder Pro 42mm gravel tires with tan sidewalls, of course. And I'm gonna put Silca tire sealant in there because Silca has been very supportive of the mental health advocacy work I'm doing on this channel. Now, because we are using Silca's tire sealant and it has carbon fiber in it, which is awesome for sealing holes, but not so awesome for factory installed tubeless rim tape. I'm gonna set this down a second. This is standard DT Swiss tubeless rim tape. It works really awesome, except for when it has tire sealant in it with carbon on it. And then it will shred this tape until there's no tape left. And so we are going to take this tape out. This is DT Swiss mountain bike wheels that I have. We're gonna, on the Prime Auras, we're gonna take the factory installed tape out and we are going to replace it like this with a set of Stan's tire tape or WTB rim tape so that our sealant doesn't do any damage. So when you see me pull the tire rim tape out of the good set straight from the factory and you wonder why I'm doing that, that's why, because our awesome tire sealant will eat alive the factory install. In 2019, if you had asked me what's in my mental health toolbox, I would have laughed you out of the room. Quite honestly, I wouldn't have known what you were even talking about. So it's probably better if we start with what I thought would happen if I asked for help. In 2019 and 2020, as I continuously fell further away from the person that I was, the more I started to realize something was wrong. But I had one continuous fear that kept me from getting help. I talked earlier about how the medical field didn't really know what was wrong with me and that they had done all kinds of tests on me, tested me for HIV and things like that because they were kind of out of ideas. But I also have to say that my primary care physician, 3 years before everything fell apart, had said that it was maybe time to start having a conversation about mental health. And I totally rebuffed this idea. Maybe I was prideful or scared. I do remember thinking that I'm not as messed up as other people that I've seen need help for mental health, so I'm probably good. I remember having concerns that like admitting help would indicate a crisis of faith for me. And so I didn't get help. I couldn't explain what was wrong or how I felt, and so the whole thing felt like this giant risk. Like a personal risk, a professional risk, a spiritual risk. I had so much anxiety about what would happen if I had to come home and tell my wife how I felt, and maybe more so if I had to come home and tell her something was wrong with my mental health. I was really scared that the teams that I was coaching and the leadership positions I had within the school, I was scared they would be taken away. And I really wondered how I would explain this to my own kids. I think about that guy a lot. That scared version of myself that was too afraid to ask for help because of what he thought was going to happen. And I want to go back and look that terrified version of myself in the eyes. And I want to tell him that asking for help is going to be the best risk you'll ever take in your life. It will be so worth it to go and get help. And it's not actually very scary, especially if you're willing to talk about it with people. And I finally did ask for help. And the first people in the school I talked to got me up to the nurse so that I could talk to her, and she in turn got me to doctors who could help me. And with time, they got me to the psychiatrist so that I could be diagnosed and get put on the right meds, which of course, it took a long time. But one of the really influential conversations I had was with my sister along the way. She's a doctor herself, and she told me, you need to go to therapy or to counseling, because you need someone who can coach you on how to live life. And that's how I needed to hear it. Because to me, counseling or therapy or whatever we want to call it was for people with broken marriages or rich housewives who didn't have anything better to do, or people whose lives were generally flaming dumpster fires. And that wasn't me. That's what I thought. And I get it. Like, I had a strong prejudice against counseling and therapy. To me, the whole process was Gandalf wizardry and just complete nonsense. But I knew I needed help. And having it explained to me as coaching for bipolar was the way that I needed to hear it. I was ready, but like all these things, it takes time. It took 4 months before I could even be seen by a therapist. And once we started working together, it took me another 2 months before I had my first true, like, holy shit moment where I really had that breakthrough. But through all that time, I started gaining tools to put in the toolbox. I started learning how important exercise was to my day. I started learning how important sleep on a regular basis was, whether I was manic or depressed. I started to see how important movement was within my day, and I added that tool to the toolbox. I started to see the value of journaling on a regular basis and setting long-term goals that I could chip away at. I started to learn the value of working with my hands. And so coming into this space and working every day on my bikes or on projects within the shop became a huge tool within the toolbox. And this space kind of became a sacred space for me to come and work almost every day. The thing about the tools in this toolbox is they can't operate on their own to solve the problem. If you need a screwdriver, you can't use a hammer. Or if you need a hammer, a screwdriver is not going to do the job very well. And so all of these skills I learned, whether they were things like movement or exercise or sleep or journaling or goal setting, or whether they were guardrails in place to keep me from getting too manic, or whether they were things like my meds, each of them served their own purpose, and they had to work together. And if I started to depend on one more than the others, that's when I found problems. Everything had to do the job that it was meant to do, so the others could do their job too. I struggled for a long time after I was diagnosed with who I was and trying to get back to some version of myself that I thought was the right version. Maybe it was 2015 version, or maybe it was who I was in 2018, or whenever. I guess it's kind of like this bike project. At what point is this going to be good enough? What part is it that we could purchase that would make this thing perfect? I remember I was out on a ride in April of 2022. It was a cold spring morning, and these same questions were rolling around in my head. And I finally realized I just needed to be happy with this current managed version of myself. I realized that the version of myself that I was chasing from previous in my life would actually try to end my life if I got back to that point. And so this new managed version of myself that was a little bit more low-key and definitely more balanced, it was okay. I should be content with that. I realized everyone around me didn't really care if I was more chill, or if I had an earlier bedtime now, or if I had these guardrails in place that meant I didn't do certain things I used to. They loved me for who I was, and they were happy that I was alive. And I would guess that people around you feel the same way. I guess this series doesn't have a real neat and tidy finish. I mean, the bike looks good, but when we talk about mental health, there's not really a neat and tidy finish because most things in life don't have a neat and tidy finish. Life moves forward as we try to discern what's happening. And the reality is that all of us are broken. Some of us are just a lot better at hiding it than others. I kept my issues to myself for over 10 years before I couldn't. But a mental health diagnosis is not the end of anyone's story. It's not the end of your story, and it's certainly not been the end of my story. And regardless of where you find yourself on the mental health spectrum, however alone you feel right now, you're not alone. You're not the only one who feels the way you do. And you are for sure not so far gone that you can't receive help. Let yourself be vulnerable for just a second. It changed my life to go to our school nurse and say, I'm not okay. And I don't even know how to explain what's wrong. You're not too far gone. And it doesn't mean that you're gonna have to air your laundry on social media or make YouTube videos about it. But maybe it does mean you go to a family member and you say you don't feel yourself. Or you go and talk to a medical professional. I've been down the path and I made it out the other side, but I could never have done this without people around me who reached out and helped as well. If you're around people who need help, please don't give up hope on them. Please keep loving them and listening to them and encouraging them and gently saying the things they need to hear so they can get back on the path to being the best version of themselves. The version of themselves that you maybe think they've abandoned. You don't have to be neat and tidy because it's impossible. But everyone does deserve to be the best version of themselves. And everyone deserves to feel loved because you are loved.